Oliver Vance was in the middle of reviewing the final details of his next big acquisition when his assistant, Jenna, entered his office with a letter. "This came for you, Mr. Vance. It's from Italy," she said, handing him the envelope. Oliver glanced at the return address, a frown forming on his face. It had been years since he'd thought about Italy, specifically the vineyard where he'd spent those long, hot summers with his grandfather. Tearing the envelope open, he quickly scanned the letter. His grandfather, Giovanni Vance, had passed away, leaving him the vineyard in Tuscany. "What's it say?" Jenna asked, sensing something significant. "My grandfather died," Oliver replied, his voice flat. "He left me the vineyard." Jenna paused, expecting more emotion. "I'm sorry to hear that. Are you going to keep it?" Oliver shook his head, already thinking about the logistics. "No, I'll sell it. The sooner the better. I'll fly out, get everything settled, and be back by the end of the week." "Do you think that's wise? I mean, it's a family estate." "I don't have time for nostalgia, Jenna. I have a multi-billion-dollar deal closing soon. This is just a distraction." The Tuscan countryside was as picturesque as ever, but Oliver's mind was elsewhere as his car wound through the rolling hills toward the vineyard. He could already see the headlines for his latest deal, Vance Seal's landmark acquisition. The vineyard was just a detour, a relic from a past he had no interest in revisiting. When he arrived at the vineyard, the familiarity of the place struck him unexpectedly. The main house looked just as it had when he was a child, albeit more weathered by time. He stepped out of the car, his eyes scanning the property with a businessman's cold detachment. Before he could approach the door, it opened, revealing a woman with striking features and a gaze that was anything but welcoming. "Oliver Vance, I presume," she said, her voice carrying a faint but unmistakable Italian accent. "That's right," Oliver replied, extending his hand. "And you are?" "Isabella Rossi," she said, ignoring his outstretched hand. "I've been managing the vineyard since your grandfather fell ill." Oliver dropped his hand, slightly taken aback by her cold reception. "Thank you for your efforts, Miss Rossi. I'm here to finalize the estate and arrange for the sale." Isabella's eyes narrowed. "Selling it? Without even understanding what you've inherited?" Oliver raised an eyebrow, more intrigued than insulted. "It's a vineyard. I'm sure there are plenty of buyers who'd appreciate it." "It's not just a vineyard," Isabella shot back. "It's your family's legacy. Your grandfather didn't see it as a commodity." Oliver sighed, already tired of this conversation. "Look, Miss Rossi, I respect what you're saying, but I have a business to run. My grandfather's affairs need to be settled, and this vineyard needs to be sold." Isabella's gaze hardened. "I won't let you destroy everything your grandfather worked for just because you're too focused on your billions to care." Her words hit a nerve. Oliver wasn't used to being spoken to like this, especially not by someone he just met. But instead of anger, he felt a flicker of something else. Doubt, maybe? Still, he wasn't about to let her sway him. "I'll make my decision after a full assessment," he said, his tone cool and final. "Until then, I expect your cooperation." Isabella didn't reply. Instead, she turned on her heel and walked back into the house, leaving Oliver standing alone in the fading daylight. For a moment, he felt a strange sense of loss, a disconnection from something he couldn't quite place. As Oliver stood on the veranda, watching the sun dip below the horizon, the sound of an approaching car broke the silence. A sleek, silver Maserati pulled up the gravel driveway. The door opened, and a tall, impeccably dressed man stepped out, a confident smile on his face. "Oliver Vance, I presume?" the man called out, his tone smooth and self-assured. "I've been looking forward to meeting you." The next morning, Oliver was walking the vineyard, assessing the property. The land was beautiful, but all he could think about was its potential market value. Despite himself, he found his thoughts drifting to what Isabella had said. Could there really be more to this place than just a piece of real estate? "Mr. Vance," a voice interrupted his thoughts. Oliver turned to see the man from the previous evening approaching, his smile just as polished as his suit. "Lucas Rinaldi," the man said, extending his hand. "I represent a group of investors who are very interested in acquiring this vineyard." Oliver shook his hand, though the man's demeanor put him on guard. "Investors, huh? I wasn't aware there was so much interest." "There's quite a bit of interest," Lucas replied, his tone casual. "This vineyard has potential, More than you might realize. I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer." Before Oliver could respond, Isabella appeared, her expression hardening as she saw Lucas. "This vineyard isn't for sale, Lucas," she said firmly. "We've discussed this before." Lucas's smile never wavered. "Isabella, always so passionate, but you know as well as I do that business is business. Mr. Vance understands that, I'm sure." Oliver frowned. "Why are you so eager to buy this place, Rinaldi?" Lucas's eyes gleamed with something predatory. "Let's just say I see opportunities where others see only old vines and fading memories. Selling to me would be in your best interest." Oliver's instincts screamed that something was off. "Thanks, but I'll pass. I'm not interested in selling right now." Lucas's smile tightened. "Of course, take your time, but remember, the market waits for no one." With a final glance at Isabella, Lucas walked back to his car. As he drove off, Oliver turned to Isabella. "What's his deal?" "Lucas has been trying to get his hands on this vineyard for years," Isabella said, her voice laced with contempt. "He doesn't care about the land or its history, just the profit." "Why is he so interested?" Oliver pressed. "There are rumors," Isabella admitted, "that the soil here is unique. It could make this land incredibly valuable to the right buyer." Oliver considered her words. If true, it explained Lucas's eagerness. The stakes were higher than he'd thought. "So, there's more to this place than meets the eye," he murmured. Isabella nodded. "But your grandfather never cared about that. To him, this vineyard was about love, not money, and he wanted you to see that too." Oliver felt a tug of something unfamiliar. Was it guilt? Curiosity? He wasn't sure. But as he watched Isabella walk away, her words lingered in his mind. As Oliver stood there, his phone buzzed, a message from New York. The deal he'd been working on was progressing faster than expected. He needed to make a decision soon. But for the first time in his life, Oliver wasn't sure what the right choice was. The next morning, Oliver stood in the vineyard's old records room, a small, dusty space filled with boxes of documents, ledgers, and journals. Isabella had insisted he see these before making any decisions about the sale. Though skeptical, Oliver was also curious about what his grandfather had left behind. "Here," Isabella said, pulling out an old, weathered journal. "Your grandfather kept meticulous notes on everything. This one covers the last few years before he fell ill." Oliver flipped through the pages, noting the detailed entries about the vineyard's yield, weather patterns, and soil conditions. Giovanni had poured his heart into this place, more than Oliver had realized. But it was a ledger at the bottom of a box that caught his attention. "What's this?" Oliver asked, pulling out a thick, leather-bound book. Isabella's brow furrowed. "I'm not sure. I haven't seen that one before." As they opened the ledger together, they discovered a series of entries that didn't match the other records. These were more personal, almost like a diary, and at the back of the book was an envelope marked "Last Will and Testament." Oliver's heart skipped a beat. "Another will?" They carefully unfolded the yellowed document. Unlike the official will Oliver had received, this one seemed more hastily written, and the language was more personal. It stated that the vineyard was to be left to someone Giovanni believed would continue his legacy, Isabella Rossi. "This doesn't make sense," Oliver muttered, reading the document again. "Why wouldn't the lawyer have mentioned this?" Isabella's face was pale, her suspicion of Oliver now mingled with shock. "I didn't know about this, but if it's real, it changes everything." Oliver could feel the ground shifting beneath him. The vineyard, which he had dismissed as a mere distraction, was becoming something far more complex. He had always viewed his grandfather as a man of integrity, but this hidden will suggested secrets Oliver hadn't been prepared for. "This could be a draft, or maybe he never had it witnessed," Oliver said, trying to maintain control of the situation. "But it's clear he wanted you to have the vineyard." Isabella's eyes narrowed, her voice tinged with bitterness. Or maybe he just didn't trust his grandson to appreciate it. Oliver was taken aback by her directness, but before he could respond, she continued, "What are you going to do? Ignore this? Sell the vineyard anyway? Or are you going to honor what your grandfather wanted?" The accusation stung, and Oliver felt a wave of defensiveness rise within him. But beneath that was a nagging doubt. Had his grandfather truly intended for Isabella to inherit the vineyard, or was this just a draft, a fleeting thought that never came to fruition? I need time to think, Oliver finally said, his voice measured. I'm not going to make any rash decisions. Isabella didn't look satisfied, but she nodded. You should, because if you don't honor his wishes, you're no better than Lucas. Isabella walked out of the room, leaving Oliver alone with the will and his conflicted thoughts. He had come to Italy to settle a simple estate, but now he was faced with a moral dilemma that could not only change his plans, but also force him to confront parts of his past he had long buried. As Oliver struggled with the implications of the hidden will, a new complication arrived in the form of his estranged sister, Maxine. She appeared at the vineyard unannounced, her expression a mixture of anger and disbelief. Oliver, she said coldly as she stepped out of her car, I thought you'd show up eventually. Oliver's surprise quickly turned to irritation. Maxine, what are you doing here? What do you think? She shot back, her voice dripping with resentment. I heard about Grandpa's death, and I figured you'd swoop in to claim whatever was left. Oliver felt a pang of guilt, but he masked it with frustration. I'm here to settle the estate, not to claim anything. I didn't even know you cared. Maxine's eyes flashed with anger. Just because I didn't follow you to New York doesn't mean I don't care about our family or the vineyard. I've been in touch with Grandpa, even if you weren't. The accusation hung heavy in the air. Oliver had always assumed that by distancing himself from the family, he was doing what was best for his career, but Maxine's words cut deep. So what's your plan? Maxine demanded. Sell it off to the highest bidder and walk away? Oliver hesitated, his thoughts still tangled with the discovery of the hidden will. It's not that simple. Maxine's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Oliver sighed, realizing he couldn't avoid the truth. There's another will, one that says the vineyard was supposed to go to someone else. Maxine's expression shifted from anger to shock. Who? Who was it supposed to go to? Isabella, Oliver admitted, watching as Maxine absorbed the information. She shook her head, disbelief mingling with frustration. So you just found this will? Or are you saying you knew about it all along? I found it this morning, Maxine, Oliver replied, trying to keep his voice steady. I didn't know. Maxine crossed her arms, her posture defensive. And what are you going to do? Sell the vineyard anyway and ignore Grandpa's wishes? I don't know, Oliver confessed. I need to figure this out. Maxine's gaze was intense. You've already taken so much from this family, Oliver. Don't take this too. Maxine's words hung in the air, and for the first time, Oliver felt truly cornered. Not only was he grappling with his grandfather's hidden will and Isabella's claim, but now his sister was here, demanding answers and threatening to unravel whatever fragile control he still had over the situation. The discovery of the hidden will, Maxine's unexpected arrival, and the looming presence of Lucas Rinaldi all weigh heavily on Oliver as he tries to decide the vineyard's future. Isabella remains guarded, her suspicion of Oliver's true motives simmering just below the surface. Though they now share a common goal of keeping the vineyard afloat, the tension between them is palpable. Are you really going to fight for this place, or is this just a way to appease your guilt? Isabella asks one evening as they work late in the vineyard office, going over financial records. Her words sting, but Oliver keeps his composure. I don't know what I'm doing yet, Oliver admits, but I'm not going to walk away without understanding what's really going on here. Despite the tension, they find themselves forced to work together more closely. The vineyard's financial situation is dire, and unless they can turn things around quickly, the only option will be to sell. Isabella's knowledge of the vineyard is invaluable, but Oliver's business acumen proves surprisingly useful, even to Isabella, though she's reluctant to admit it. As they start to make progress, strange things begin to happen. First, the vineyard's irrigation system malfunctions, flooding a crucial section of the vines. Then, several barrels of wine mysteriously spoil overnight, a costly setback. Oliver suspects Lucas's involvement, but without proof, there's little they can do. Lucas isn't just trying to buy the vineyard, he's trying to destroy it, Oliver tells Isabella after they discover the ruined wine. Isabella nods grimly. He'll do whatever it takes to make you sell. The pressure mounts, and Oliver finds himself becoming more invested in the vineyard than he expected. It's no longer just a piece of land. It's a challenge, a responsibility, and increasingly, a source of pride. But just as they begin to feel like they might have a chance, disaster strikes. One night, a fire breaks out in one of the storage barns, threatening to spread to the vineyard itself. Oliver and Isabella rush to the scene, managing to contain the blaze with the help of the vineyard workers, but the damage is done. Equipment is lost, and the setback puts their already fragile operation at risk. Do you still think this is just a business transaction? Isabella challenges Oliver as they stand by the smoldering remains of the barn. No, Oliver replies, shaken by the night's events. There's more at stake here than I realized. As they assess the damage, Oliver makes a decision. He's going to fight for the vineyard, not just for himself, but for the legacy his grandfather tried to preserve. But he knows that Lucas won't back down, and the next move could be even more dangerous. Determined to uncover the full story behind the vineyard, Oliver spends more time digging into his grandfather's records. With Isabella's reluctant assistance, they start to piece together a history that had been hidden from Oliver for years. Giovanni Vance wasn't just a passionate vintner. He was a man fighting against the odds to keep the vineyard alive in the face of external pressures and personal sacrifices. In an old chest in the attic, they find a bundle of letters exchanged between Giovanni and a close friend, detailing the struggles the vineyard faced over the decades. The letters speak of financial hardship, difficult harvests, and an unnamed adversary who seems disturbingly familiar to Oliver, Lucas's father. I had no idea, Oliver says quietly, reading the letters by the dim light of a single bulb. My grandfather fought so hard to keep this place going. And Lucas, he's been after it all along. Isabella, who has been reading over his shoulder, shakes her head. This vineyard has always been worth more than just the wine it produces. Giovanni knew that, and so does Lucas. Among the papers, they find something that shocks them both. A geological survey from the 1950s suggesting that the land has unique properties, possibly due to mineral deposits in the soil. This, Oliver realizes, is the hidden potential Lucas is so desperate to exploit. The vineyard sits on land that could be incredibly valuable, not just for wine, but for other, more lucrative uses. This is why he's so determined to get his hands on it, Oliver mutters, and why he'll stop at nothing to force us out. The discovery puts Oliver in a precarious position. He knows that if Lucas learns that they've uncovered the land's true value, he might escalate his efforts to take control. But keeping the information secret is equally dangerous. If Lucas finds out they're hiding something, he could become even more aggressive. Whatever we do, Oliver says, turning to Isabella, we can't let Lucas know we've found this. We need to protect this vineyard, not just from him, but from anyone else who might try to exploit it. As Oliver and Isabella decide to keep the discovery to themselves, they know they're taking a huge risk. The stakes are higher than ever, and with Lucas still watching their every move, any misstep could spell disaster. The tension between Oliver and Isabella begins to soften as they work side by side. The late nights spent poring over records and the long days in the vineyard bring them closer together. The walls they had built around themselves start to crack, revealing the vulnerabilities and fears they've both been hiding. One afternoon, as they walk through the vineyard, Isabella shares a story from her childhood, how she came to the vineyard as a young girl, drawn to its beauty and the kindness of Giovanni, who took her under his wing. Oliver listens, surprised by how much he enjoys hearing about her past, and by how much he finds himself opening up to her. I used to think that success meant leaving everything behind, Oliver admits, as they sit beneath a large oak tree, the sun casting dappled shadows over the ground. But maybe I've been wrong. Maybe there's something more to life than just making deals and amassing wealth. Isabella looks at him, her expression softer than it has been in days. People don't change easily, Oliver, but sometimes circumstances force us to. Their conversation drifts into silence, but it's a comfortable one. The hostility that marked their early interactions has faded, replaced by a growing respect and a connection that neither of them expected. The vineyard, once a battleground, has become a place where they can both find solace. But just as they begin to acknowledge their feelings for each other, Lucas makes his next move. Under the cover of night, someone sabotages the vineyard's most crucial equipment, putting their entire operation at risk. The damage is extensive, and it's clear that this was no accident. Lucas is trying to push us over the edge, Oliver says, frustration and anger boiling over as he surveys the wreckage. He's not going to stop until he breaks us. Isabella, though shaken, is resolute. Then we can't let him win. We need to rebuild, and we need to do it fast. They work tirelessly to repair the damage, but the attack leaves them both on edge. The vineyard's future is more uncertain than ever, and so is their growing relationship. The pressure brings them closer, but it also forces them to confront the reality of their situation. Just as they finish the repairs, Oliver receives a call from New York. His business deal is on the brink of closing, but he needs to return immediately to seal it. Torn between his old life and the new one he's beginning to build, Oliver must make a choice that could change everything. The vineyard was starting to feel more like home to Oliver, but his life back in New York was pulling him in the opposite direction. One morning, as he and Isabella walked the rows of vines, Oliver's phone buzzed with a message. It was from Jenna, his assistant in New York. "Your deal's moving forward," the message read. "They need you back ASAP." Oliver stared at the screen, his mind racing. This was the deal he had been working on for months, the one that would cement his position at the top of the financial world. But as he looked up from his phone, he saw Isabella kneeling beside a vine, inspecting the grapes with the same care she always did. The thought of leaving her, and the vineyard, filled him with a sense of dread he hadn't expected. "Bad news?" Isabella asked, glancing up at him. "Not exactly," Oliver replied, slipping his phone back into his pocket. "The deal I've been working on, it's about to close. They need me in New York." Isabella's expression didn't change, but he could see the tension in her eyes. "So, you're leaving?" "I have to," Oliver said, but even as the words left his mouth, they felt wrong. "This deal, it's huge. It's everything I've worked for." "And what about the vineyard?" Isabella asked, her voice quiet but firm. "What about everything we've been fighting for?" Oliver didn't have an answer. He had always known he would leave eventually, but now that the moment was here, he felt torn in a way he hadn't anticipated. The vineyard had become more than just a piece of land. It was a part of him, and so was Isabella. Later that day, Maxine confronted him, clearly frustrated with his indecision. "Are you really going to abandon us again, Oliver?" she demanded. "You've been here, a few weeks? And now you think you can just walk away?" "It's not that simple," Oliver tried to explain. "This deal is important. It could secure our future, yours and mine." Maxine shook her head, her anger barely contained. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't just about money. It's about our family, our heritage. If you leave, you're turning your back on everything Grandpa wanted for us." Her words hit Oliver harder than he expected, but he couldn't ignore the reality of his situation. The deal was too important to let go, but so was everything he had started to build here. Yet, in the end, the pull of his old life was too strong. With a heavy heart, Oliver made his decision. He would leave for New York, closing the door on the vineyard and on Isabella. As he prepared to leave, the look of hurt and betrayal in Isabella's eyes was almost too much to bear, but he forced himself to turn away, convincing himself that he was doing the right thing. As Oliver packed his bags, readying himself for the flight back to New York, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was making a mistake. But before he could leave, he stumbled upon a conversation between Lucas and Maxine that sent shockwaves through him. Hidden behind the corner of the main house, Oliver overheard Lucas's smooth voice. "I told you, Maxine, this is the best way forward. If you sign over your claim, I can ensure you get a fair share, and we can finally put this vineyard to good use." Maxine's voice wavered. "But what about Oliver? He's my brother. I don't want to betray him." "This isn't betrayal," Lucas insisted, his tone oily. "This is business. Oliver doesn't care about this place like we do. You deserve more than just a tiny share. Together, we can make this vineyard profitable, far more than what it's worth now." Oliver's blood ran cold. Lucas was manipulating Maxine, trying to get her to sell her claim and turn against him. All of Lucas's moves were starting to make sense. The sabotage, the pressure, the relentless pursuit. It wasn't just about the land, it was about control. And Maxine was about to fall into his trap. "Maxine, don't do it," Oliver said, stepping out from his hiding place. Both Maxine and Lucas turned, shock and guilt evident on Maxine's face. Oliver, you can't trust him. Oliver cut her off, his voice hard. He doesn't care about you or the vineyard. He's been playing all of us. Lucas's expression darkened. This isn't what it looks like, Vance. I'm offering Maxine a fair deal, something you've clearly failed to do. Oliver ignored Lucas, focusing on his sister. Maxine, don't sign anything. He's using you to get what he wants. Maxine hesitated, torn between her loyalty to her brother and the promises Lucas was making. But you're leaving, Oliver. You're abandoning us again. Oliver felt the weight of her words, realizing how deep her resentment ran. But before he could respond, Lucas stepped in. Your brother doesn't care about this vineyard, Lucas said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. He's only here to make a quick buck and leave. Don't let him guilt you into making the wrong decision. Maxine looked between Oliver and Lucas, her hand hovering over the document Lucas had prepared. Oliver could see the conflict in her eyes, but he knew that if she signed, it would be over. He couldn't let that happen. But before he could say another word, Isabella appeared, her expression cold as she realized what was happening. Isabella's eyes darted between the three of them, her expression hardening as she pieced together what was happening. What's going on here? Isabella, Oliver began, but she cut him off with a sharp look. I heard enough, she said, her voice icy. You're leaving, aren't you? Just when we need you the most. Oliver opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. He could see the pain and betrayal in Isabella's eyes, the hurt she was trying so hard to conceal. I thought you cared, Isabella continued, her voice trembling. I thought you were different, that you might actually want to save this place. But I guess I was wrong. It's not like that, Oliver protested, feeling the ground beneath him shift. I care about this place. I care about you. Then why are you leaving? Isabella's voice cracked, her anger giving way to vulnerability. Why are you turning your back on everything we've fought for? Oliver didn't have an answer. The truth was, he didn't know why he was leaving, only that he felt torn between the life he had always known and the new life he had started to build here. But now, standing in front of Isabella, seeing the hurt in her eyes, he realized how much he stood to lose. You're right, Oliver finally said, his voice heavy with resignation. I've been so focused on my old life that I didn't see what was right in front of me. But I'm not going to let Lucas take this vineyard. I'm staying. Isabella stared at him, her eyes searching his face for the truth. Do you mean it? Yes, Oliver said firmly. I'm going to fight for this vineyard, for us. The decision settled over him like a weight lifting from his shoulders. He had been running from his past for so long, but now he realized that the vineyard was his chance at redemption, a way to honor his grandfather's legacy and make amends for the choices he had made. But as soon as the words left his mouth, Oliver knew that this was just the beginning. Lucas wouldn't give up easily, and the fight for the vineyard was far from over. With renewed determination, Oliver began to plan his next move. He would need to gather all his resources, call in favors, and prepare for a final showdown with Lucas. But as he turned to Isabella, he saw the doubt still lingering in her eyes. The damage had been done, and even if they won the battle, Oliver knew that regaining Isabella's trust would be his greatest challenge yet. The vineyard's fate comes down to a tense, high-stakes negotiation between Oliver and Lucas. The two men meet in the old winery, the air thick with tension. Lucas is confident, his smile predatory as he lays out his terms. Face it, Vance, Lucas says, leaning back in his chair. You're out of your depth here. Sell me the vineyard, cut your losses, and go back to your life of luxury. This place is nothing but a money pit. Oliver remains calm, though the pressure is immense. You don't care about this vineyard, Lucas. You never did. It's just another acquisition to you, one that you'll bleed dry until there's nothing left. Spare me the moral high ground. Lucas replies, his voice dripping with disdain. This is business, pure and simple, and you're in way over your head. Oliver knows Lucas is trying to rattle him, but he refuses to back down. He presents a counteroffer, one that puts everything on the line. He's prepared to fight for the vineyard, using every resource at his disposal. But as the negotiations drag on, it becomes clear that Lucas has the upper hand, until Isabella arrives. Bursting into the room, Isabella holds up a folder, her face flushed with determination. You're wrong, Lucas. We're not done yet. She places the folder in front of Oliver, who opens it to reveal crucial information about the vineyard's true potential, information that even Lucas didn't know. It turns out that the mineral deposits in the soil, which had been hinted at in earlier discoveries, could be worth far more than anyone had anticipated. This changes everything, Oliver says, a spark of hope in his eyes. Lucas's expression falters for the first time. He hadn't expected this. Where did you get this, he demands, but it's too late. Oliver and Isabella have turned the tables on him. With the new information, Oliver is able to renegotiate the terms, forcing Lucas to back down. The victory is hard won, but it comes at a cost. The vineyard has survived, but the battle has taken its toll on everyone involved, especially Oliver, who realizes just how close he came to losing everything. As the dust settles, Oliver and Isabella share a moment of quiet relief, but the victory feels bittersweet. They've won the battle, but Oliver can't help but wonder what they've lost along the way. The tension between them remains unresolved, leaving Oliver to face the consequences of his choices. After the confrontation with Lucas, Oliver seeks out Maxine, hoping to finally address the rift between them. He finds her in the vineyard, sitting alone on the edge of the property, staring out at the rows of vines. Maxine, Oliver says softly, approaching her. She doesn't turn to look at him, but he can see the tension in her shoulders. What do you want, Oliver? I want to talk, he says, sitting down beside her. About everything. For a long moment, neither of them speaks. The silence is heavy, filled with years of unspoken resentment and pain. Finally, Maxine breaks the silence. You were always the one who left, she says quietly. You never looked back. Not when Mom and Dad needed you, not when Grandpa needed you. And now, you think you can just come back and fix everything? Oliver feels the weight of her words, but he knows she's right. I know I can't undo the past, he admits. But I want to try to make things right. I was wrong to leave, and I was wrong to think I could come back here and solve everything with money. Maxine finally looks at him, her eyes filled with tears. You don't understand what it was like, Oliver, watching everyone else leave while I stayed behind, watching everything fall apart. I know I don't, Oliver says, his voice filled with regret. But I want to understand. I want to be here now to help rebuild what we've lost. Maxine's expression softens, and for the first time, Oliver sees the hurt in her eyes begin to ease. Lucas tried to use me, she admits. He made me think that selling my share was the only way to save the vineyard, but now I see that he was just trying to divide us. Oliver reaches out and takes her hand, squeezing it gently. We can still save the vineyard, Maxine, but we have to do it together. Maxine nods, wiping away her tears. Okay, let's do it. As they stand together, the bond between them begins to heal. But just as they start to make plans for the future, Oliver finds one last piece of the hidden will, a clause that could change everything they thought they knew about the vineyard and their family's legacy. With Lucas out of the picture, the vineyard is finally safe, but there's still much work to be done. Oliver and Isabella throw themselves into restoring the vineyard to its former glory. Days blend into nights as they work side by side, repairing damaged equipment, nurturing the vines, and overseeing the rebranding of the vineyard's wines. The shared effort brings them closer, their connection deepening with each passing day. As they work, they begin to open up to each other in ways they hadn't before. Oliver, once closed off and focused solely on his career, starts to share his dreams of a life less driven by ambition and more by meaning. Isabella, too, reveals more of her own hopes, her desire to see the vineyard not just survive, but thrive, and her fears about what the future holds. One evening, after a particularly long day, they sit together on the veranda, watching the sun set over the vineyard. I never thought I'd find myself here, doing this, Oliver admits, his voice soft. But now, I can't imagine being anywhere else. Isabella smiles, her hand resting lightly on his. This place has a way of changing people. It gives you a second chance if you're willing to take it. Oliver looks at her, the truth of her words resonating deeply within him. He had come to Tuscany with the intention of selling off a piece of his past, but instead, he had found a new future, one that was rich with possibility, love, and redemption. As the vineyard's grand reopening approaches, Oliver feels a sense of pride and fulfillment he hasn't known in years. They've done it. Together, they've saved the vineyard and given it a new life. But just when everything seems to be falling into place, Oliver receives an unexpected message from New York. The morning of the grand reopening, Oliver makes his choice. He declines the offer from New York, severing his ties to the past and fully embracing the life he has found in Tuscany. "I'm staying," he tells Isabella, the weight of the decision lifting from his shoulders. "This is where I belong." Isabella's eyes shine with emotion as she steps into his arms. "I'm glad," she whispers, "because I can't imagine this place without you." The grand reopening is a resounding success. Guests from the local community and beyond fill the vineyard, marveling at the transformation. The new wines receive rave reviews, and the vineyard is once again alive with the promise of a bright future. Oliver watches the celebration unfold, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction and peace. For the first time in his life, he knows he's exactly where he's meant to be. As the evening winds down, Oliver and Isabella walk through the vineyard, hand in hand. The vines, now healthy and strong, stretch out before them, a symbol of everything they've worked for and everything they've become. "This place has changed you," Isabella says softly, looking up at him. "It's changed both of us," Oliver replies, squeezing her hand, "and it's given us something worth fighting for." They stop at the edge of the vineyard, the moonlight casting a silver glow over the rows of vines. Oliver pulls Isabella close, his heart full of gratitude and love. "This is our legacy," he says, his voice steady. "Not just the vineyard, but the life we've built together." Isabella nods, tears of happiness in her eyes. "And it's just the beginning." The early morning light filtered through the rows of vines, casting a golden glow over the vineyard. It was harvest season once again, and the vineyard buzzed with quiet activity as workers moved between the vines, carefully picking the ripe grapes. The air was filled with the sweet, earthy scent of the harvest, a scent that Oliver Vance had come to cherish. Oliver stood at the edge of the vineyard, looking out over the land that had come to mean so much to him. A year had passed since the grand reopening, and the vineyard was thriving. The hard work had paid off, and the vineyard was now producing some of the best wine in the region, just as his grandfather had always dreamed. "Thinking about how far we've come?" a voice behind him said. Oliver turned to see Isabella approaching, a warm smile on her face. She was wearing her usual work clothes, hair pulled back in a messy bun, but to Oliver, she had never looked more beautiful. "I was," Oliver admitted, reaching out to take her hand. "It's hard to believe sometimes. This place, our life together, it's everything I didn't know I was looking for." Isabella squeezed his hand, her smile widening. "And to think you almost missed out on all of this." Oliver chuckled, a sound that had become more frequent in the past year. "I did, but I'm glad I didn't. I can't imagine being anywhere else." They stood together, watching the workers move through the vineyard, the sun climbing higher in the sky. It was a scene of peace and fulfillment, one that Oliver had never thought possible in his old life. "Are you ready to start the day?" Isabella asked, her tone light but with a hint of mischief. Oliver turned to her, raising an eyebrow. "I think so. But first, there's something I want to show you." Curiosity sparked in Isabella's eyes as Oliver led her to the far side of the vineyard, where a small plot of land had been cleared. In the middle of the clearing stood a newly constructed building, its stone walls blending seamlessly with the surrounding landscape. "What is this?" Isabella asked, her voice filled with wonder. "It's our new wine cellar," Oliver explained, guiding her inside. The interior was cool and dimly lit with rows of oak barrels lining the walls. "I wanted to surprise you. We're going to start a new label, a special reserve, just for us." Isabella looked around in awe, her eyes shining with emotion. "Oliver, this is incredible. You did all this for us?" Oliver nodded, pulling her close. "For us, this vineyard, this life, it's all about building something together, something lasting. Just like this wine, it's meant to be savored, cherished." Isabella wrapped her arms around him, resting her head on his chest. "I love you, Oliver." "I love you too, Isabella," he whispered, kissing the top of her head. As they stood there holding each other in the cool, quiet cellar, the world outside faded away. It was just the two of them, and the life they had built together. Outside, the workers continued with the harvest, unaware of the couple's moment of intimacy. The vineyard was alive with the promise of the future, and the vines, now strong and healthy, stood as a testament to the power of love, commitment, and the willingness to start over. Oliver and Isabella emerged from the cellar, hand in hand, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring. But this time, they would face them together. As they walked through the vineyard, the sun now fully risen, they knew that this was only the beginning. The vineyard, once a symbol of Oliver's past, had become the foundation of their future, a future filled with love, family, and the legacy they would pass on to the next generation. And as they looked out over the land, they knew that they had found something truly special, a life worth living, a love worth fighting for, and a place they could finally call home.